Eleanor, put the gun down!
Get off my property, Zach!
Zach's hand froze on the porch's splintering wood, his heart beating a little too loud. From inside the house, a shotgun blast rang out, cutting through the quiet of the afternoon like a scream. The kind of sound that made the skin crawl. He knew the sound. He'd heard it more times than he cared to count, but it didn't make it any easier. He hesitated just a second too long. Then he pushed open the door and stepped into the mess. Eleanor stood in the threshold, her face pale but hard. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but there wasn't a tear left. The shotgun hung by her side like a broken promise. Zach didn't move. "You're just like him, aren't you?" The question hung there, sharp and cold, but Eleanor didn't flinch. She tightened her grip on the shotgun. "I'm not my father," she said, her voice steady, though the air between them crackled like an incoming storm. "Maybe not." Zach's voice cracked. "But you're still gonna pay, aren't you?" She didn't answer. She only stared at him, all that anger and grief inside her, turning into something else, something that was almost quiet. Something dangerous. She stepped back, into the dark of the house, but not before Zach grabbed her arm. He was rough, but she didn't fight back. His fingers dug into her skin, and they both knew he wasn't letting go. "Let me go, Zach." Her words were soft, but there was a weight behind them. A warning. He didn't care. Not yet. He was too far gone. The house smelled of smoke, dust, and old regrets. Zach pulled her inside, dragging her across the worn floorboards that creaked with every step. His eyes flicked across the room, old family portraits lining the walls, their faces frozen in time. Every one of them staring at him, accusing him. She'd never known what he carried. He'd never wanted her to. She stopped in front of a table, the corners of the old room heavy with things unsaid. Then she reached into her pocket, pulled something out. A letter. Yellowed with age, corners frayed. She placed it down on the table. Zach's gaze flicked to it before he looked up at her again, anger burning in his chest. "What's this? You think this will change anything?" He reached for the letter, tearing it open, the sound loud against the silence. His eyes scanned it. His fingers gripped the paper too tightly, as if holding it could stop everything inside him from falling apart. Eleanor's voice was low, resigned. "It's the truth. You deserve to know." Zach gritted his teeth, the words heavy in his chest. His hand shook, the paper in his grip crumpling. "The truth's got a way of rotting everything it touches," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Without another word, he shoved the letter back into her hands, turned, and stormed out. The door slammed behind him, echoing in the hollow silence of the house. Eleanor didn't move. She only stood there, staring at the door as if waiting for it to open again. But it didn't. The past was behind it now. The air in the house felt thick, too thick to breathe. She stepped over to the window and looked out at the dry land, the same land that had seen everything go wrong. She reached for the letter again, pulled it close, then walked out to the back. The backyard was just as desolate, a mirror of the house. An old well stood in the center, its stone sides weathered with time, just as forgotten as the stories it held. She paused for a moment before dropping the letter into the well, watching it disappear into the darkness below. Her hand lingered for a second longer than it should have before she turned away, stepping back inside to face whatever was left of the ruins. The silence was suffocating. She closed the door behind her. Zach's boots hit the dirt hard as he walked back to his truck. The letter still burned in his hands, its meaning dancing just out of reach. It wasn't the kind of thing you just read and put down. It was the kind of thing that changed everything. And it didn't matter how much he wanted to ignore it, he couldn't. His mind spun, his grip tightening on the steering wheel, knuckles turning white as the dust kicked up behind him. He drove, not caring where, just needing to move. The weight of it all settled like a stone in his chest, a rock that didn't want to leave. By the time he got home, the sky was already beginning to burn with the setting sun, blood-red and heavy with heat. His father's place was still the same, silent, empty, just like it always was. He parked the truck, slammed the door behind him, and went inside. His father was at the table, as always, but he didn't look up when Zach walked in. He didn't have to. They didn't need to speak. Not anymore. Zach tossed the letter on the table with a snap that echoed louder than it should have. The old man didn't react. Zach, you knew. The words weren't a question. They were a challenge. A demand for the truth. His father finally looked up. His face was a mask, old, weathered, tired. The man had stopped caring about what anyone thought a long time ago. Zach, you knew about her father. About the debts. The lies. His father didn't say anything. He just stared at the letter, his eyes narrowing as if seeing something else entirely. Zach, why didn't you tell me? The silence in the room pressed in, suffocating. Zach's fingers dug into the table, the old wood creaking under his grip. He wanted to hit something, anything, but all he could do was watch his father. The man who had always been nothing but cold to him, yet somehow still felt like the only thing that had ever been his. His father's voice was hoarse when he spoke, as if dredging up something long buried. Father, wasn't my place to tell you. Zach couldn't understand it. Zach, not your place? You're my father, damn it. The words hung in the air, louder than they should have been. His father's eyes didn't change. The two of them stood across from each other in the silence, the years of distrust and unspoken truths clawing at them both. There was nothing left to say. Nothing that could explain it. Zach turned away, unable to look at the man anymore. The old house felt colder than it had in years, as if the walls themselves were turning on him. He grabbed his hat and stormed out without another word. His father didn't stop him. He never did. Outside, the world didn't look any different. The sun was setting in the distance, casting long shadows across the land, but it all felt empty now. Zach stood at the edge of the porch for a long moment, staring out at the land. Everything around him had been built on lies. His father. Eleanor's father. The entire damn town. He could feel it in his bones. He needed air. He needed to be anywhere else. The truck's engine roared to life again, and he sped off, not caring where he was headed. He just needed to be gone. Eleanor sat on the porch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She watched the dust swirl in the air as the sun began to fade into twilight. Her mind kept returning to the letter, to the look on Zach's face when she handed it to him. The words she'd written weren't meant for him, not really. They were meant for herself, for the memories of a father who had never been a father at all. She thought of the things she'd buried, things she'd never told anyone, and the burden of carrying it alone. She heard the sound of an engine in the distance. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Zach was back. He didn't speak when he walked up to her. He didn't need to. The tension between them was thick, woven through every moment of their history. He stood there for a beat too long before he spoke, his voice low and bitter. Zach, you think you can just drop that on me, Eleanor? You think a letter makes it all go away? Eleanor didn't move. She stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched. Eleanor, I'm not trying to make anything go away. I'm trying to make sense of it all. You think I don't know what your family's done? What they left behind? Zach didn't answer at first. He just stood there, fists clenched at his sides. The wind picked up, but it felt too still between them. Like they were standing in the eye of a storm, too close to see the destruction brewing around them. Zach, this doesn't change anything. My family, your family, what do we even owe each other anymore? Eleanor's eyes finally met his, cold and hard. She didn't flinch. Eleanor, we owe each other the truth. That's all we've ever owed. She stood up, brushing off her pants as she faced him, the evening sky hanging heavy above them. Her words were simple, but they carried more weight than Zach could ever put into a badge or a gun. Eleanor, the past doesn't let go, Zach. No matter how far we run from it, it's still here. Zach's chest tightened, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he walked past her, heading toward the back of the house. Eleanor stood there, unmoving, watching him leave. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for. But she knew one thing, this wasn't over. It wasn't even close. She turned back to the porch, her heart heavy with a mix of regret and something darker. The land stretched out before her, vast and empty. And in the distance, she could almost see the ghosts of the past, waiting to claim them both. The fire started small, just a flicker at first, barely a wisp of smoke curling in the dry air. But Eleanor knew what it meant. She stood on the hilltop, eyes fixed on the distant glow. She didn't need to check the time. She knew exactly where it was coming from. Her house, the last remnants of her father's legacy, was burning again. Zach's truck pulled up next to her, dust swirling up behind it like an angry cloud. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The sight of the flames was enough. He stood beside her, staring out at the chaos. Zach, you just gonna let it burn? Eleanor didn't look at him. She couldn't. Her eyes stayed on the fire, on the destruction. Her throat was tight, but she swallowed hard. Eleanor, I never asked for this place. But it's the last thing my father left me. Let it burn. Zach's jaw tightened, the words a slow burn of their own. He wanted to say something, but the fire, the land, everything between them, had already said too much. He glanced at her, the hard lines of her face illuminated by the orange glow. She wasn't backing down. The heat reached them even from this distance, the air thick with smoke and the smell of something else, something that wasn't just wood and dust. It was loss. It was the things they both carried, the things they'd never be able to outrun. Eleanor, it's already gone, Zach. All of it. Everything he left behind, it's just ashes now. Zach didn't answer. He watched the flames lick at the sky, the smoke twisting into the night. There was nothing left to say. Just the fire, the land, and the weight of years that couldn't be undone. Hours later, Zach sat in his truck, staring out at the blackened remains of the house. He could feel the heat of the fire still on his skin, like it was seared into him now. But it wasn't just the fire. It was everything, the history, the debts, the weight of the badge on his shoulder. His father's badge. His father's mistakes. His mind went back to the letter Eleanor had handed him, to the truth she'd revealed. His family, her family, tangled in ways he didn't even want to understand. His father's sins. Her father's sins. It all blurred together in a mess of guilt, and now it was burning away. But the fire didn't fix anything. It just destroyed. Zach, you still holding on to all this? Eleanor's voice came from behind him, quiet, but firm. She didn't wait for an answer. She never did. She stood there, her silhouette sharp against the dying light. The fire was almost out now, just a smoldering heap of rubble. But even with the flames gone, the air still felt thick, heavy. As if something was still burning beneath the surface. Eleanor, you think this will make it better? You think this fire is the end of it? Zach turned, finally meeting her eyes. The anger was gone, replaced by something else, something that hurt more than all the anger combined. Regret. Zach, I don't know what I'm supposed to feel anymore. Eleanor stepped closer, her boots crunching the dirt beneath her. The wind picked up, stirring the ashes around them. It was all so damn quiet now, too quiet for either of them to speak freely. "Eleanor, you think it was ever supposed to be easy?" "Zach, no. But I thought, maybe. I thought there was something left worth saving." Her gaze softened, just for a moment. She understood that much. But understanding wasn't enough. Not anymore. "Eleanor, you can't save anything by holding on to the past, Zach. It's already gone. All of it." Zach wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her that there had to be something left, something they could fix. But the words died in his throat. The past was already too far gone for that. The silence hung heavy, thick like the smoke that still lingered in the air. Eleanor stood still, staring at the remains of what had once been a home. It was just a pile of charred timber now, memories crumbling into dust. "Zach, so what now?" Eleanor didn't answer at first. She let the question hang in the air between them, unfinished. There was nothing left to do but move forward, but even that felt like a lie. How do you move forward when everything you knew has already burned down? "Zach, what are you gonna do with all of it, Eleanor? The past. The debts. The fire. What now?" Her voice was low, quiet, but there was fire in it still. "Eleanor, I'm done running from it. I'm done letting it burn me alive. Maybe it's time to make sure it never happens again." Zach didn't say anything. He didn't know what to say. Her words stung, but he couldn't argue with them. She was right. The past would never let go, but maybe they didn't have to let it drag them down. Maybe they could find something new, something that wasn't built on lies and blood. But there was no simple answer. There never had been. Zach looked at her, the years of bitterness between them finally giving way to something else, something softer, but not weaker. A silent understanding passed between them. "Eleanor, you should go home, Zach. You've got your own fires to put out." He didn't argue. He just nodded, turning back to the truck. He started the engine, the sound breaking the silence between them. But before he drove off, he glanced back once more. "Zach, maybe we'll find a way out of this. Together." Eleanor's eyes didn't leave the burning rubble, but she didn't need to look at him to know what he meant. The fire wasn't over. Not for either of them. But maybe they could rebuild. Maybe they didn't have to do it alone. The truck rumbled away into the night, and Eleanor was left standing there, alone with the ashes and the wind. She couldn't run anymore. Neither could Zach. And the fire still burned, somewhere deep inside. The sun hung low in the sky when Eleanor arrived at Zach's ranch. She didn't know what she was expecting when she got there, but the long stretch of land before her, the faded barns, a house just as tired as the man who owned it, left her with a feeling she couldn't shake. She'd never been here before, but somehow, it felt like she'd always known it. She'd seen it in her nightmares, in her thoughts when the night was too quiet, too still. It was the kind of place that's soaked in its own history, full of dust, full of silence. She didn't stop at the gate. She pushed through, her boots hitting the dirt with each step as the wind blew a gust of heat across her face. The air was dry, a little too dry. The land felt parched, like it had been waiting for something, anything to come and revive it. She couldn't bring herself to care about any of it. The moment she walked up to the porch, Zach stepped out onto the steps. His eyes were guarded, unreadable, but the tight set of his jaw told her everything she needed to know. He hadn't expected her. And he wasn't happy to see her. "Zach, you're not welcome here." Eleanor didn't flinch. She hadn't expected a warm greeting. "Eleanor, no one ever asked me where I was welcome, Zach." She was close now, too close for him to avoid her. Zach stepped down from the porch, keeping a distance between them, his eyes wary. He looked like a man who'd lived too many years trying to outrun the truth, trying to outrun people like her. "Zach, what do you want, Eleanor?" Eleanor didn't answer at first. She stood there for a long moment, looking at him, at the house behind him, at everything she never asked for. Her father's debts. His failures. Her own failures. Eleanor, I need you to listen. I'm not here to start anything. I'm here because you need to know the truth. Zach raised an eyebrow, but he didn't say anything. He crossed his arms, waiting. Zach, truth? What truth? I've heard enough lies to last a lifetime. Eleanor let out a slow breath. She could feel the walls closing in around her. The years of silence. The weight of things unsaid. The connection between their families. The old grudges. Eleanor, your father, he wasn't just a man who wore a badge, Zach. He was a man who made decisions, just like mine did. And they left us here, in this mess. Both of us. Zach stared at her, confused, anger flashing in his eyes. She knew he wanted to dismiss it, to walk away, but something inside him stopped him. Zach, you think I don't know about my father's choices? You think I don't carry that weight? Eleanor, then stop pretending like you're the only one who gets to carry it. We're both here because of what they did. What they left behind. And you can't just bury it like you've been doing. There was a long silence. Zach didn't respond. He didn't know how. The words he wanted to say were tangled up inside him, and he wasn't sure he was ready to untangle them yet. His father, her father, they'd both left them with so much more than debts. Zach, you think I can just fix it? You think this is something you can fix? Eleanor didn't move, didn't blink. Her eyes stayed locked on him, unflinching. Eleanor, maybe not. But maybe we can stop it from happening again. Zach opened his mouth, but no words came. His mind raced, the pieces of their past shifting around him like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. He could feel his father's presence in every corner of this place, in every crack in the wood. He could hear his father's voice in his own head, telling him what to do, what to say. And he hated it. Zach, you don't get to come here and tell me how to fix things. You don't know anything about me, Eleanor. Eleanor stepped forward, closing the distance between them. The tension between them was thick now, almost suffocating. Eleanor, I know enough. I know what it feels like to be buried by something you didn't ask for. To have to fight every damn day just to stay alive in this place. Zach didn't answer. He couldn't. Her words hit too close to home. Eleanor, I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to give you the truth, whether you want it or not. The truth about our families. About everything. Zach's gaze shifted, a flash of something fear, maybe crossing his face for a second before he quickly masked it. He didn't know how to deal with this. He never had. Zach, what does that even mean, Eleanor? Eleanor's voice softened, but there was a hardness beneath it. Eleanor, it means your father was my father's brother. They weren't just two men who lived in the same town. They were family. And that's the part neither of us ever knew. Your father's choices? They affected me just as much as they did you. Zach took a step back, his head spinning. It didn't make sense. His father never spoke of her father, never spoke of any family beyond what he could control. Zach, you're telling me my father was your uncle? Eleanor nodded. It felt strange saying it aloud, but the words were heavy with truth. Eleanor, you think this mess is just yours? It never was. It was ours. And it's time you knew that. The silence between them was thick now, the air charged with a tension that neither of them knew how to release. Zach's head spun, his thoughts racing. His family. Her family. The things they never knew. The things that had haunted them both for too long. Zach, what do we do now? Eleanor stood tall, her gaze unwavering. Eleanor, we stop pretending like we don't have a choice. We stop running from what's been haunting us for years. Maybe it's time we start fixing it together. Zach didn't know if that was possible. But in that moment, he didn't feel as alone as he had before. He didn't know what they could do, what they would do. But maybe, just maybe, they could find a way through it together. The sound of the wind picked up, sweeping across the barren land, stirring the dust between them. Neither of them moved, but for the first time, they didn't need to. The weight of the past had been laid bare, and for the first time, they both understood something: they couldn't escape each other. The storm rolled in by midnight, thick clouds swallowing the sky whole. Eleanor didn't wait for it. She knew it was coming, knew it as well as she knew her own name. She stood at the edge of the old graveyard, the wind biting at her skin, the air heavy with the smell of rain. Her boots dug into the damp earth, the weight of her steps sinking deeper with each movement. The tombstones were old, half-worn, cracked, names barely legible, like forgotten promises. No one came here anymore. No one remembered. But she did. She wasn't alone, though. Zach stood a few feet behind her, eyes fixed on the graves. The weight of the past, the ghosts of the people they'd both lost, seemed to follow them, walking in the silence between their words. Neither spoke, not yet. The storm gathered, the thunder low and rumbling in the distance. It was a reminder that some things couldn't be outrun. Eleanor stepped closer to one of the graves. She knelt down, brushing the dirt aside, her fingers tracing the faded letters on the stone. It had been years since she'd been here. She never wanted to come back, but something about Zach, about the letter, about everything, had brought her here. Zach's voice cut through the night, rough, strained. "Zach, what are we doing here, Eleanor? You want me to dig up old ghosts?" Eleanor didn't look up. She kept her gaze fixed on the stone beneath her fingers. It wasn't just the past that haunted her, it was the truth. The truth that had been buried with her father, with her family, and with Zach's. "Eleanor, this is where it started. This is where everything ended." Zach stepped closer, standing just behind her now, but still keeping his distance. He could feel the weight of her words, but he didn't know what they meant. "Not yet." "Zach, what do you mean?" Eleanor finally looked up at him, her eyes tired but sharp. "Eleanor, this is my father's grave. But it's not just his. It's where everything began, where it all went wrong. And it's where your father's choices led us both." Zach's breath caught in his throat. The name on the stone didn't mean much to him. He'd never known the man buried here. But now, standing in the graveyard, under the storm that rumbled overhead, he realized that he couldn't escape it. His father's sins, his mistakes, they were here, too. They were always here. "Zach, you want me to forgive him? You want me to bury the past, just like you buried your father?" Eleanor stood, brushing the dirt from her hands. Her gaze stayed locked on the grave, but there was no anger in her now. Just something colder. Something older. "Eleanor, no. I'm not asking you to forgive anything. I'm asking you to understand that we're both tied to this. We can't keep running from it." Zach didn't know how to respond. His mind was still spinning. The words she spoke, the things she revealed, they weren't simple. They never would be. But there was something in them, something that made sense in a way he hadn't expected. He felt like he was standing at the edge of something bigger than him, than his badge, than his family. He didn't know what to do with that. He didn't know what to do with her. "Zach, so what now?" Eleanor stepped back from the grave, her eyes still on the stone. The storm was getting closer now, the wind picking up, the air charged with the coming rain. "Eleanor, now we make sure this never happens again." Zach looked at her, his chest tight. He wanted to ask her how. How could they fix this? How could they undo what had already been done? But he knew the answer. The answer was buried here, in the graveyard, in the mistakes they couldn't change. "Zach, and if we can't?" Eleanor turned to face him, her eyes dark and steady. "Eleanor, then we make sure no one else has to bury their family, too." The storm hit then, the rain pouring down in sheets, drowning everything in its wake. Neither of them moved. They just stood there, side by side, soaked to the bone, with nothing left but the truth between them. The past they couldn't escape. The past that was never really gone. The thunder rumbled above them, a low, steady growl, as if the earth itself was warning them. The wind howled through the graveyard, the graves bending under the pressure. And in that moment, Zach realized that he wasn't alone anymore. He wasn't just carrying his father's mistakes. He was carrying hers, too. They were carrying them together. But there was still something they could do. Something they could change. Zach, I don't know if I can fix this, Eleanor. Eleanor didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was all the answer he needed. They both turned then, walking away from the graveyard, the storm still raging behind them. The past might not have been buried, but maybe, just maybe, they could stop it from burying them. The rain fell harder as they reached the edge of the graveyard, the land stretching out before them, endless and empty. The storm faded into the distance, but the weight of the past remained, just behind them, just out of reach. Neither of them looked back. The rain hadn't let up when Eleanor and Zach pulled up to what was left of her house. The ashes still smoldered, curling in the damp air, the remnants of what once stood now just a smudged memory. Eleanor had seen the fire burn it down, but this? This was different. The weight of the ruin felt like it was choking her, like the land itself had taken everything she'd ever known, swallowed it whole. She stepped out of the truck, her boots sinking into the mud as she stared at the crumbled wreckage. Zach followed her, his steps slow, unsure. Neither of them spoke as they walked toward the ashes, the sound of the rain falling around them like the sound of the world crying. Zach, you're still gonna do this? Eleanor didn't look at him. Her gaze stayed on the wreckage. The rain ran down her face, mixing with the dust and soot on her skin. She wiped it away without a second thought, her eyes still fixed on the charred remains of the house. Eleanor, it's all I have left. Zach didn't answer right away. He was watching her, studying the way her body tensed, the way she stood there like the storm had nothing on her. But he knew better. The storm wasn't what was hurting her. It was everything else. Zach, you can't rebuild what's already gone, Eleanor. She finally turned to face him. The rain pelted against them, but there was no softness in her expression. No fear. Just something raw, something almost like resolve. Eleanor, I'm not rebuilding it, Zach. I'm burying it. The words hit him harder than he expected. He looked at the ruins again, and for a moment, he didn't see the burned-out house. He saw the years of anger, of brokenness, of things that couldn't be fixed, just buried and forgotten. But Eleanor wasn't about to bury anything. Not anymore. She stepped forward, her boots sinking deeper into the mud. The ground was soft here, as if it were still reeling from the fire, still struggling to heal. She reached the spot where the kitchen used to stand. A few beams were still intact, charred black, lying across the wreckage like old bones. She paused, kneeling down in front of the pile. Zach stood back, his hands stuffed in his pockets. The storm had quieted, but the weight in the air hadn't lifted. It felt like they were both waiting for something to crack, waiting for the final act to play out. Zach, what are you doing? Eleanor didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small bundle of chart papers. The same one she'd tossed in the well all those weeks ago. The letter. The truth. Eleanor, I'm not going to carry this anymore, Zach. She held the papers over the pile of ash and flame, her fingers trembling just slightly. She had carried it for so long. Her father's debts, his mistakes, his legacy. She couldn't do it anymore. She couldn't let it drag her down into the dirt like everything else had. Zach took a step forward, his voice a little softer now. Zach, you don't have to do this. Eleanor's gaze didn't leave the ashes. She didn't even blink as the papers ignited in her hands. The fire took them fast, like it was hungry for them, like it needed them to fuel it. She watched them burn, the smoke swirling around her as the words on the page disappeared into nothing. Eleanor, it's done, Zach. Her voice was quiet, almost reverent. She stayed there, holding the burning papers above the fire, until there was nothing left. Only ash. Only dust. She stood, staring down at the ground where the letters had once been, watching them curl away into the wind. Zach watched her, something stirring inside him. He had always been so sure of his place in this world, so certain that the badge on his chest would keep him from becoming something he hated. But standing here, watching Eleanor bury her past, watching her destroy the thing that had kept her tethered to all the pain, he felt like he was seeing her in a way he never had before. He didn't know what it meant yet. But he knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. "Zach, what now?" Eleanor stood up and turned to face him. Her eyes were steady now, the fire in them something more than anger. It was resolve. It was power. "Eleanor, now we make sure no one else has to burn." Zach didn't know if that was even possible. But in the moment, standing there in the rain, watching her walk toward the remnants of her past, he wasn't sure it mattered. They were both buried in this, together. The debts. The lies. The fire. It wasn't gone, not yet. But maybe, just maybe, they could finally bury it for good. They stood there in the rain, the storm now completely gone, leaving only the smell of wet earth and ashes in the air. The land was still, quiet. And for the first time in a long while, the weight on their shoulders didn't feel as heavy. "Zach, so, we rebuild?" Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She simply walked past him, her gaze fixed ahead. "Eleanor, we don't rebuild, Zach. We move on." The quiet lingered between them as they both turned away from the ruins. The past might have burned, but the future? That was still waiting. And for the first time in a long time, they both had a chance to face it. Together. The sun hung low in the sky, a faint orange glow bleeding across the horizon as Zach and Eleanor stood side by side in the aftermath of the storm. The land around them was still, save for the occasional gust of wind that swept across the ashes. It felt almost too quiet now, too peaceful for what had just happened. For the things that had been burned away, the truths that had finally come to light. Zach glanced at Eleanor, her profile hard against the setting sun, her eyes distant as she took in the landscape. She had always seemed so strong, so certain. But now, as they stood on the edge of what was left, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were both standing on a precipice. "Zach, you sure about this?" Eleanor didn't turn to face him immediately. She just stood there, her hands folded at her sides. The way she was looking at the land, like it was a blank slate, told him everything he needed to know. She didn't just want to let go of the past. She wanted to start fresh. "Eleanor, the past doesn't get to own us anymore, Zach. We get to choose now." Her voice was steady, but there was something in it that Zach hadn't heard before, something softer. Maybe even hopeful? He wasn't sure. He wasn't sure about a lot of things anymore. "Zach, and what about the rest of it? All that stuff we can't just burn away?" Eleanor finally looked at him then, her gaze piercing, like she could see right through him. Her lips pressed together, a hint of something unspoken in her eyes. "Eleanor, we carry it with us. But we don't let it kill us." Zach took a step forward, his boots sinking into the wet earth. The weight of the moment was still hanging heavy between them, like a thing they couldn't shake. The past, the debts, the violence, it was all still there. But maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to be defined by it. "Zach, you really think we can change it? What we've been carrying all these years?" Eleanor didn't hesitate. She didn't blink. She just stood her ground, her face hardened in a way that reminded him of how she had looked in the graveyard, in the fire. Like someone who wasn't afraid of facing the worst parts of herself anymore. "Eleanor, it's not about changing it. It's about making sure it doesn't destroy us." There was something in those words that shifted in him. Something that clicked. She wasn't asking him to forget. She wasn't asking him to forgive. She was asking him to fight, to stop running and finally face what they were both afraid of. "Zach, so we fight?" Eleanor looked at him now, fully, her eyes steady, unflinching. She nodded once. "Eleanor, we fight. But this time, we do it together." It was simple. It was clear. The past couldn't be erased, but it didn't have to be the thing that dictated everything from here on out. They had a choice. They had each other. And for the first time, Zach felt like maybe that was enough. maybe it always had been. The next day, the land seemed to wake up, as if it, too, was breathing again after the storm. The air was clearer, the earth softer beneath their feet as they walked together toward the old barn. Zach's hand rested lightly on his gun belt, the weight of it familiar, but the badge on his chest felt different. Not as heavy as it had before. Not as defining. He still didn't know what kind of man he wanted to be. But today, at least, he felt like he had more than just the badge to answer for. He had something else now. A sense of purpose. Eleanor was ahead of him, walking with the kind of steadiness that made him want to keep up. She had been through hell and back, but here she was, still moving forward, her eyes on the future, not the past. When they reached the barn, the door creaked as they pushed it open, the smell of old hay and wood mixing with the fresh scent of rain. Inside, the space was empty. The walls were bare, the old tools still hanging where they'd always been. But the place didn't feel like it had been abandoned. It felt like it had simply been waiting. Waiting for them. Eleanor, we start here. She didn't have to explain. Zach knew what she meant. This was the first step. This was where they could begin to rebuild, not the house, not the land, but themselves. The choices they made now would determine how they moved forward. How they faced the things that had haunted them. Zach, what now? Eleanor walked over to the far corner of the barn, where a pile of old lumber was stacked up, ready to be used. She ran her fingers over the wood, her eyes distant for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, like she was planning something she knew would work. Eleanor, now we put it back together. Piece by piece. We fix what we can. And the rest? We leave behind. Zach didn't need any more explanation. He walked over to the pile of lumber and started picking up the pieces. He wasn't sure how long it would take to rebuild what had been lost, what had been burned, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Together, they worked through the day, building something new from the wreckage. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close. But it was something. It was theirs. The sun set slowly, casting long shadows across the barn, but neither of them stopped. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The work spoke for them. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was just them. And it felt like a start. Later, when the work was done for the day, they stood outside the barn, looking out at the land. The sky was clear now, the stars slowly making their appearance as the night settled in. Zach's hand brushed against Eleanor's arm, just a fleeting touch, but it felt significant. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't something they could ignore. Zach, we've come this far. Eleanor looked up at him, her face softer than he'd seen it in a while. Eleanor, we haven't come this far just to stop now. The wind kicked up again, but this time, it felt like it was carrying something new. Something that wasn't just the weight of the past. It felt like the first spark of something different. A new kind of fire. Zach, then let's make sure it burns right. Eleanor smiled, a small, quiet thing. Eleanor, we will. And for the first time in a long time, Zach believed her. The morning was gray and quiet when Eleanor and Zach stood at the edge of the land. The earth felt solid under their boots, but there was something about it, something heavy, that still held them. A quiet tension, like the land itself was waiting for something. Or perhaps, it was them. Waiting for them to decide what to do next. Zach shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his eyes scanning the horizon. The wind had died down, leaving everything still, the world just a little too calm after all that had happened. Zach, you think it's gonna be enough? Eleanor didn't immediately answer. Her gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, on the patches of land that had once been part of a place that felt like home. She could feel the weight of the past pressing on her, on them both, but this time, it wasn't suffocating. This time, it was just something to face. Eleanor, I don't know. But it's what we've got. She glanced at him then, the edges of her expression softer than they had been in a long while. She wasn't asking for anything, wasn't waiting for any promises. But there was something unspoken between them, a shared understanding that they were both walking the same path now, whether they were ready for it or not. "Zach, it's a hell of a thing, isn't it?" Eleanor nodded slowly, her lips pressed together. She turned away, walking toward the remains of the barn. Zach followed her, the sound of their boots echoing in the quiet morning air. The barn wasn't much yet, still half-built, a skeleton of its former self, but it was something. A beginning. A place to start fresh. She'd given up so much already, but this? This was hers to shape. "Eleanor, we make our own way now. Whatever it takes." Zach watched her for a long moment, his hands resting at his sides. He wanted to say something, wanted to ask her if she was sure, if she really knew what she was doing. But he didn't. The truth was, he didn't have the answers, either. He just knew that this, whatever this was between them, wasn't over. Not by a long shot. "Zach, you don't have to do this alone, you know." She didn't look at him, but he could see the way her jaw tightened, the way her fingers curled into fists at her sides. She was still carrying all of it. All the things she didn't want to carry. All the things they both needed to leave behind. "Eleanor, I'm not asking for help, Zach." Her words were sharp, but not cruel. It wasn't anger. It was just the weight of it all, the weight of years spent in silence, years spent letting the past rule everything. But she wasn't letting it rule her anymore. Zach stepped closer, his voice low, but steady. "Zach, you don't have to. But you don't have to carry it alone, either." The air between them shifted then, the unspoken understanding between them growing stronger. She finally turned to face him, her eyes meeting his in the soft light of morning. "Eleanor, maybe we can't fix everything. But we can stop it from happening again." Zach nodded, his gaze steady. For the first time, he didn't feel the weight of the past pushing him down. For the first time, he felt like he had something to fight for. Something more than just the badge, more than just the legacy of a man who hadn't been what he claimed to be. "Zach, we're gonna make sure it doesn't burn us, Eleanor." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face, looking for something, maybe answers, maybe something more. Then she gave him a small, quiet nod, her lips curving slightly. "Eleanor, I'm not afraid of what comes next. Not anymore." They stood there for a moment, the land stretched out before them, the barn rising behind them like a new beginning. There were no promises, no guarantees. But there was something else between them now. Something stronger than all the years of silence, of lies, of grudges. The past hadn't just burned away in the fire, it had transformed into something new. Something they could live with. Something they could fight for. The wind picked up again, swirling around them, but this time, it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a promise. A new kind of fire, burning bright and steady. "Eleanor, let's get to work." Zach didn't hesitate. He nodded, the tension in his chest lifting for the first time in a long time. They both turned, walking toward the barn, each step a little lighter than the one before. And behind them, the land stretched out, waiting for what would come next. The fire of the past still burned somewhere deep inside them, but it wasn't the thing that defined them anymore. They had built something new, something that wasn't tied to the old lies or the weight of everything they had lost. It wasn't a perfect solution. It wasn't even a solution at all. But it was a start. And for the first time, Eleanor and Zach knew that was enough. The day stretched on, the sun now high in the sky, casting long shadows across the barn and the land that surrounded it. Eleanor and Zach worked in silence, their movements fluid, the rhythm of their labor echoing the quiet peace between them. There were no more words for what had already been said. No more need for explanations or apologies. There was only the task at hand, rebuilding. The barn was coming together, piece by piece, and so were they. But the work didn't erase everything. There was still the weight of what had been left behind, the past, the people, the choices that had been made. And though they didn't speak of it, Zach knew. He felt it in the way Eleanor moved, in the quiet moments when she would stop, staring out at the land, her eyes far away, as if the ghosts of everything she'd buried still lingered just behind her. Zach set down his hammer and wiped the sweat from his brow, his eyes drifting to her. She was standing by the half-finished wall, looking at the horizon, her posture stiff and distant. "Zach, you're not fooling anyone, Eleanor." She didn't look at him, but her shoulders stiffened. She was always so guarded, so determined to keep it all inside. But the cracks were starting to show, the way the past was always lurking, never far enough away. "Eleanor, I'm fine." The words were too quick, too sharp. Zach knew her well enough by now to recognize when she was lying, even to herself. "Zach, you're still carrying it. You're still carrying all of it." There was a long pause before she spoke again. When she did, her voice was quieter, the edge gone. "Eleanor, I'm just trying to keep moving forward. I don't have time for anything else." Zach took a few steps toward her, his boots crunching on the dirt. He wanted to say something, anything that would break through that wall she'd built, but he didn't know how. All he could do was stand beside her, silent, waiting for her to look at him. Eleanor finally did, her eyes locking onto his, her face softening just the slightest bit. "Eleanor, I'm tired, Zach." Her voice cracked a little, and that was enough. That was everything. Zach didn't know how to make it better. He wasn't even sure it could be made better. But he knew this much, they couldn't keep running from it. Neither of them could. "Zach, you don't have to carry it all by yourself." Eleanor didn't answer right away. She just looked at him, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen before, a kind of vulnerability, raw and real. She had been so closed off for so long, so determined to handle everything on her own. But now, here they were, standing in the ruins of their family's legacies, and maybe, just maybe, they could share this. Share the weight. "Eleanor, I don't know how to stop." The words hung in the air, heavy and fragile. She had been living with this for so long, holding it in until it nearly destroyed her. She had to keep moving, keep working, keep fighting. Because if she stopped, if she faced it all, she wasn't sure she would survive. "Zach, you don't have to stop. Just let someone help you carry it." Eleanor's eyes flickered, and for a moment, she looked like she might break. But then, like always, she hardened. She took a step back, retreating into herself. "Eleanor, I don't need saving." "Zach, I'm not trying to save you, Eleanor. I'm just trying to stand beside you." She said nothing for a long time, but the silence between them wasn't as heavy as it had been before. It was quieter, like something unspoken was shifting between them. The tension, the anger, the old wounds, they were all still there, but there was something new, too. A possibility. Eleanor looked out over the land again, her gaze far away, but she didn't pull away from him this time. She stood there, next to him, as if she didn't have to face it all alone anymore. "Zach, what happens now?" Eleanor didn't answer at first. She stood there, thinking, the weight of the question settling between them like a bridge. She wasn't sure what the answer was. Neither of them was. "Eleanor, we keep moving forward." Zach nodded, his hand finding hers for the briefest of moments. It was small, just a touch, but it was everything. It was a promise, a silent understanding that they didn't have to do this alone. Not anymore. "Eleanor, I don't know what's next, Zach. But I know we can't keep running from the past. Not anymore." Zach didn't know how they were going to move forward. He didn't know how they would rebuild the things that had been lost, or if they even could. But he did know one thing, they were done running. Done hiding from the things they had buried for so long. And whatever came next, they would face it together. The land stretched out before them, quiet and waiting, but now, it didn't seem as empty as it had before. It felt like it was theirs to shape, theirs to make something of. They weren't the people they had been. The past had burned them both, but they had survived it. And now, maybe, just maybe, they could find something worth fighting for. Together. The sun was starting to dip behind the horizon, the sky turning shades of purple and orange. The day was ending, but the work wasn't over. And neither were they. "Zach, let's get back to it." Eleanor nodded, her grip tightening in his hand, just for a moment. They turned together, heading back toward the barn, toward the future they would build, not just out of wood and nails, but out of everything they had left. And for the first time, it felt like enough. The land had never felt so wide. The earth stretched out before them, empty, vast, endless, but somehow, it didn't feel like it was closing in anymore. It didn't feel as suffocating as it once had, not with Eleanor and Zach standing together in the middle of it all. They had built something, little by little. A barn, a foundation, a future. It wasn't perfect. Nothing could be, not after everything that had happened. But it was theirs. They had done this together. It felt like the first real step towards something that wasn't buried in ash or old grudges. It felt like they were finally standing on solid ground. For the first time in a long time, they didn't feel like they were trying to outrun the ghosts of their pasts. Zach leaned against the post of the barn, his hand resting on the rough wood, his eyes on the horizon. The work had slowed, the exhaustion setting in, but there was something else that kept them moving, something that didn't feel so heavy anymore. Eleanor stepped up beside him, her boots kicking up the dry dirt as she stood next to him. She didn't say anything, just stood there, her eyes on the same distant line where the sky met the earth. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke of shared history, of understanding. Neither of them needed words to know what the other was thinking. "Zach, we've come a long way." Eleanor didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, but she nodded slowly. "Eleanor, a long way from where we started." "Zach, a long way from where I thought I'd end up." Eleanor glanced at him then, her eyes flickering over to his face. There was something in her expression, something softer than it had been. Something that wasn't as weighed down. She didn't smile, not exactly, but there was a shift, a quiet understanding. "Eleanor, you don't have to be what they made you." Zach looked at her, his gaze steady, his hands still pressed against the wood. She didn't say it like she was trying to fix him. She said it like she knew it, like she'd lived it, too. "Zach, what if that's all we are? What if we're just—" He trailed off, his words getting lost in the wind. He didn't know how to finish the sentence. How could he? He had spent so many years trying to be someone he wasn't. Someone his father wanted him to be. A sheriff. A man of justice. But that had never fit him. Not like this. Not with Eleanor beside him, not with this land at his feet. "Eleanor, you're not your father, Zach." Her words were simple, but they carried something weightier than all the things he'd ever carried on his own. Maybe she saw him clearer than he saw himself. Maybe she always had. "Zach, maybe I'm still figuring out who I am." Eleanor's gaze softened, but she didn't respond immediately. She didn't need to. She just nodded, understanding. "Zach, we've got a long way to go. Still." "Eleanor, I know." The silence fell between them again, but it wasn't heavy. It was the kind of silence that belonged to two people who didn't need to speak anymore. They were moving forward. Slowly. But they were moving. Later that evening, the sky had turned from a pale blue to dark purple, stars scattered across the vast canvas above. The barn was coming together, the walls rising steadily, stronger now, like the ground beneath their feet. It was a slow process, but they had time. The work had become something more than just labor. It was a way to shape something, to take what had been broken and turn it into something new. Eleanor was at the far end of the barn, her hands steady as she worked on the final touches of a wall, her focus intense. Zach watched her for a moment, his heart tightening in his chest. He wasn't sure what had changed, but something had. They had both come so far from where they started, but they weren't finished yet. Zach stepped over, his boots quiet against the wooden floorboards. He didn't speak at first, just watched her, letting the silence settle between them again. "Zach, you're not running anymore." Eleanor's hands paused, her fingers curling around the beam she'd been working on. She didn't look up immediately, but she didn't need to. She had always known when he was close, always known when he was looking at her like that. "Eleanor, I don't need to run anymore." She finally turned to face him, her eyes locking with his. There was no anger in them now, no bitterness. Just something real, something raw. They had both been running, running from the weight of everything they had lost, everything they had been made to carry. But now? Now, they were facing it. Together. Zach, what happens when it's all done? When we're finished? Eleanor studied him for a long moment. Her gaze was steady, but there was something in her eyes, something soft and unspoken. Eleanor, we keep going. Zach, and if we can't? Eleanor's lips curved just the smallest bit, a hint of something like a smile. Eleanor, we don't stop trying. Zach nodded, the weight in his chest lighter than it had been in a long time. They had been through hell. Both of them. And the land? It had taken so much from them, but they weren't going to let it take everything. Not anymore. Zach, I think I can live with that. Eleanor didn't say anything more. She just stepped closer to him, her presence a quiet, steady thing that wrapped around him like the earth beneath their feet. They didn't need to say anything else. They didn't need to make any promises. The night stretched on, the stars above them a silent witness to the beginning of something new. They stood together, side by side, watching the barn rise from the dust and the ashes. It wasn't perfect, and neither were they. But they didn't need perfection anymore. They needed each other. And that was enough. And for the first time, Zach believed it.